Crooked Joe Biden is not only dumb and incompetent, I believe that he has gone mad, a stark, raving lunatic with his horrible and country-threatening environmental open borders and DOJ, FBI weaponization policies. He is a mental catastrophe that is leading our country to hell. We'll end up in World War III because of this man, and for no reason whatsoever.
I'm joined today by Mr. Legendary Energy himself, Anomaly. Yeah, I liked campaign Trump. Trump had a lot of good things to say, you know, leading us into World War III. In fact, he was particularly referencing Joe Biden's strikes on Yemen with that talk. So we're now striking Yemen over the past 48 hours. We've launched multiple airstrikes against them. And Trump sent out a tweet, which I will read to you guys in a second. But before I do that, the point of the tweet is that he's getting real feisty with Iran, which has always been my greatest concern. What are your thoughts, man? I know you have been as pessimistic or as skeptical, I should say, as I have. What are you feeling?
I feel like I'm optimistic. I guess it just doesn't always translate to politics because they always, stab us in the back. But I mean, when it comes to Iran, it's important to know the deep state for decades has wanted a war with Iran. The neocons have wanted a war with Iran. The war pigs and the war hawks have wanted a war with Iran. The Uniparty has wanted a war with Iran. I would say the media has pushed for a war with Iran. People like Netanyahu and others have been in front of Congress kind of egging on, or at least saying that this was inevitable, hoping that the United States would get involved with a war with Iran. So with that being said, I think a lot of people that like Trump are hoping that he has a plan or perhaps a strategy like the first time where it seemed like he was getting kind of close, but nothing really ever popped off. I would say this on the campaign trail. There was that second killer who had a lot more info on him. The first attempted killer, like Ryan, I forget his name. Maybe it was Ryan Ruth, or maybe that was the second one. I think it was
Crooks.
Crooks was the first one. Yeah, there was like nothing on that guy. And then the second one, he had a lot of videos. He had a lot of interviews, like on YouTube, where he had served in the Ukrainian military from America, and then he was used to recruit former terrorist organizations to I think like
Afghani fighters.
Afghani Taliban members, trying to get them to work with Ukraine. And then when all that happened, I'm not saying that for sure that was done on behalf of Ukraine, because it really could have not been. I don't know that for sure. This guy could have been rogue. But when Trump he tweeted Iran did it, that's when I was like, okay, Trump's going to probably try to start a war with Iran, because when he was running for office and it seemed like he was going to stop or prevent the war with Russia and Ukraine that they'd been boiling and trying to do for a decade, everything was Russia. Bernie Sanders supporters were Russians. Trump grandmas were Russians. People in Alabama were Russians. The media was Russians. You got to shut down RT. They just went Russia, 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 like Marsha, because they wanted to start a war with Russia. Once they got that war, when Biden got in office, now everything's Iran. Instead of Russia hacking our power grid, it's Iran did this, Iran did that. So when you have a shooter that has a lot of connections to another country and Trump just sits there and repeats what you can almost guarantee the intelligence communities and the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, told him, I'm like, okay, this guy's he's not serious. But, it's him versus Biden. Obviously, we only had so much choice. I'm not going to make a claim that I don't know, but everything I just stated, that's what I wanted to say. As far as what Trump does, how he handles it, it's a complex issue. Time will tell. That's the only real answer.
No, of course. And let me cut off my detractors and say, first and foremost, I have defended Trump's bombastic rhetoric when it comes to talking shit to other countries. I've got a bigger button than you when he's talking to North Korea, or you're going to regret this. This will be the last thing you ever do, when he was talking to Iran in his first term. And I said, look, this is his form of diplomacy. This is how he talks. I get that. So I'm not like being a snowflake about this. I understand this is Trump's preferred method of communicating foreign policy. However, there are a lot of signs here that give me greater concern. I never really feared that we were actually going to go to war with North Korea, first and foremost because they have nuclear weapons, and I don't think that Trump wanted to play that game. Then he actually proceeded to go and cross the DMZ and meet with him and do all sorts of great things. So maybe some great things come from this. I don't know. But your points are really well stated and really important for people to process. The other thing that I'll add to it is that Lindsey Graham, of all people, flipped really hard on Zelensky and the Ukraine war just a couple weeks ago, and he had been the biggest booster for a decade, and I'm not exaggerating, a full decade. He had been boosting, basically antagonism towards Russia. All of a sudden, a couple weeks ago, he flips on that and he starts going, Zelensky, he's maybe we need to get new leadership in there. And I'm like, what's happening here? And then I started to think about it, and I'm like, wait a second. Well, I wrote it off because he's facing a primary challenger, and I thought maybe that's all it is, that the America First movement is really powerful, and he has to, acquiesce to them. Then I started to think about it, and I'm like, wait a second. What if they've told Mr. Graham that they're going to pivot to the big dog, that they're going to pivot to Iran, that's what the Lindsey Grahams and the John McCains of the world have wanted for 25, 30 years. So now I'm starting to think maybe that's the reason he backed off on the funding to Ukraine. Thomas Massie famously said a few days ago that, look, we have to funnel $50 billion into the military-industrial complex every single year, and it doesn't matter where the conflict is, they're going to get their bread. And once again, Thomas Massie appears to be right. Am I reading too much into it, or do you think I'm onto something there?
No, I mean, when I posted what Thomas Massie said to my Facebook, which is a older Trump audience. I mean, there's younger people too, but it's Facebook, so there's going to be an older demographic. A lot of people really freaked out at the gall that Thomas Massie said that this was for the military-industrial complex. But when you look at Afghanistan, we spent decades, trillions of dollars in Afghanistan. We pulled out, and within a year, we were in a war with Ukraine. So it does seem that as soon as you pull out of one thing, that another thing starts. And even when it was with COVID, I can't remember the exact dates, but COVID mania lasted for years. And then to me, it felt like it just had kind of finished off, where they're like, all right, like, let's go back to normal. And then like the next day, it's like, oh, war with Ukraine, let's fund that. So it does start to seem that way. And when it comes to Trump, he's an interesting character because he's so likable. And it does seem like he is counterculture in many ways. Even the JFK and Epstein files, I know a lot of people, including myself, don't think he's really going to release them. He said he's going to tomorrow with the JFK files, but it'll probably be redacted. If it's not, that's great, but he didn't even have to say he was going to do that. If he didn't say he was going to release them, nobody would have talked about it. I think it was kind of dead in the water. Like, everybody had kind of moved on and been like, yeah, that's not coming out. So he's an interesting character, but it does feel like things kind of roll out at suspicious timing. So, for example, the Ukraine war needed Joe Biden in office. I think Operation Warp Speed and the 15 days of slow the spread needed Trump in office. I don't think Republicans would have listened to Hillary. Now it's like Trump's the cleanup guy for Ukraine and possibly the starter for Iran. So maybe it's just spontaneous, but I don't think you're wrong or anyone else is wrong to suspect that this is just kind of somewhat of a show, or Trump is doing deals with the neocons. I mean, he definitely is, but one could argue that this is a good deal. He's doing what he can. Me, I don't like Lindsey Graham. And the fact that Lindsey Graham likes Trump so much, clearly they're striking some sort of a deal. Who knows what it is? It could be a primary deal. It could be, like you said, I would think that you're probably right, that Trump's like, listen, the mother of all wars that every neocon has been wanting for the last 30 years is on the horizon. And not to add too much, because I want to let you talk, but the whole Syria thing, Trump seemed like he wanted to stop what happened in Syria. He was not able to. They got Bashar al-Assad out. That holds a lot of weight when it comes to the big war with Iran. And, they're all interconnected, but I think that was a massive, massive move. And that happened within the last 6-7 months.
Here was what Trump said on the campaign trail when he was interviewed by Tim Pool.
I look at your policies, I see secure the borders, bring jobs back. I look at the Democrats and many Republicans, and it's foreign war and foreign expansion.
That's right.
What is that?
I think it's just a failed mentality. It's crazy. You can solve problems over a telephone. Instead, they start dropping bombs. I see recently they're dropping bombs all over Yemen. You don't have to do that. You can talk in such a way where they respect you and they listen to you. Viktor Orban of Hungary, the leader, they call him a strong man. Who cares if he's a strong man or not a strong man? He's a very powerful guy. He said the problem the world has is that Donald Trump is no longer president. When he was president, China didn't play around, Russia didn't play around, nobody played around, and we had no problems. Today, the whole world is...
That was actually the same, I think it was the same day or the day before I debated Vivek Ramaswamy LP National Convention because Tim was there, and I'm pretty sure that's when he got his opportunity to interview Trump. In fact, I know it is. It was the day prior. So that was the guy. That was the guy I voted for. You know, that was the guy that I liked. I want to point out something that I think people need to be aware of, because I know most in my audience are very high level when it comes to geopolitics, but most people, like casual observers or listeners, are not. Iran's top allies, some of them, are Russia, Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria. Syria has been toppled. Lebanon, Hezbollah, has been destroyed by the IDF, or at least damaged significantly. The U.S. is now striking inside Yemen, and Russia has been bogged down in this multi-year war against Ukraine, in which they've suffered, according to some people, hundreds of thousands of losses. Some say it's less. I'm not sure. I just wanted to point that out, because if you were preparing to go to war with Iran, knowing that their ally network and knowing what a serious fight you would have on your hands, exactly what has happened is exactly what I would advise. And I say this as someone who's very anti-war, but I would say, hey, let's topple the Houthis. Let's topple Hezbollah. Let's topple or damage Putin. Let's get Assad out of power, who's their top ally in Iran was Assad. So all of those dominoes line up, and I'm like, this looks really, really bad. To steelman the opposite side of this, you could argue that, you know, Trump, with his Miriam Adelson donations and everything else, he owes a lot to the Zionist cause, and he is trying to assuage them by saying, you don't have to worry about Iran. I'm not going to war with Iran because we've already, you know, dismantled their entire alliance. I think that's the most optimistic view that I can take on this. Any thoughts? I don't know.
You know, as somebody who loves America, it would be nice if I were more naive or ignorant, perhaps, where I could think, you know, we're doing the right thing. That's always a great default. Like, yeah, we're at war, but we're on the right side. I mean, if you look at, you know, after World War II, we helped with the communists. I mean, I don't know if we would say we helped them, but we worked with them to some point, established the UN. And then, you know, the Russians got rid of the Bolsheviks and the communists, and they became Russia again after being basically infiltrated or taken over by communists who killed millions of people. Now it's almost like reverse, where Ukraine, in my view, are the new Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks and that sort of ideology has taken over nearly all of Europe. And now it's like almost the reverse, where Russia does not have that, but it seems like we're working on the side that's trying to force that into Russia. You know, I love the West. I love America unapologetically. But if you look at America, our culture has been falling apart over the last couple of decades. Our border's been open. I would say our schools have gotten worse. Our inflation's gotten worse. I still love this country, and it's a great country, but it's everybody thinks it's worse. Most Democrats, most Republicans. You look at Europe, everybody talks, including all the Republicans. They say Europe's falling apart. The UK is not the UK. Ireland's falling apart. McGregor's at the White House talking about it. Pretty much all of Europe is in shambles. And then if you look at parts of Europe that aren't in shambles, let's go to Poland, who's actually our ally. Well, now Poland's getting screwed over because of the Ukraine war. They've taken in, I think, hundreds of thousands or millions of Ukrainian immigrants, and these people are taking up the welfare programs. They're not assimilating. People are saying they're being rude. So now, and they elected some Donald Tusk character who's, you know, it seems like a sneak. So it's like that was the one ally that isn't completely destroyed. Now let's look at like Russia. You know, I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying I like them or whatever, but it's like they're, you know, a Catholic nation. They're not completely destroyed by LGBTQ plus XYZ WX and all these like globalist EU sort of policies of open borders. And what do you know? America's funding the Bolsheviks to, you know, attack them. So when it comes to Iran, it's like I'm not a fan of Iran. I'm not Muslim. I'm not Iranian. I'm not from there. I have no connection to their culture. And no offense to the people there. God bless them. But, you know, I'm not in any rush to join, for lack of a better word. Yeah, but to think that we're right here, we were wrong in Afghanistan. We were wrong in Syria. Everything that myself, Tulsi Gabbard, and probably you said happened. We were wrong in Libya. We've destroyed Europe. We've destroyed America. The Western world is in shambles. But this time, it's just going to be a moral war because Donald Trump and his donors say so, and the neocons. And finally, you know, the left-wing war hawks and neoliberals, the Lindsey Grahams and the John Boltons and Donald Trump, they're all on the same page on this one to help you. I mean, it's possible, but I would say it's in like you know, I would, like I said, I wish I were ignorant enough to believe that, but I'm not. I think we're ruining almost everything we touch. And it's sad because I like America, but the West is in shambles, America's in shambles. And if you find a country that's not totally, caving to feminism and Bolshevik ideology, you could find an enemy of the United States, or at least whoever's puppeting our country right now, because it's probably not even us.
Well, this is a really important point. The Yemenis, the Houthis, which are really they were a rebel faction. They took over their country in 2013-14, I believe. Ever since then, there was basically a civil war, and then there was also the Saudi bombing campaign against their government. They perceive themselves to be a liberation movement against the control of, Saudis, Israel, whatever. But the reason that they're attacking our ships, or the reason that they've been so threatening towards America, is because America has spent a better part of a decade arming and funding the Saudis in that bombing campaign against the Yemenis. Yeah, they kept receipts on that. They know that happened. They're not very happy with us about that. So that's step one. Step two, and the one that really has them upset, is that the U.S. backed the Israelis in their siege on Gaza. And as a consequence of that, the Yemenis, the Houthis in particular, said over and over again, they said, look, we're not a real fighting force here. I mean, they talk a lot of shit, but we're not able to take on America, but we can fucking make your life hell in the Red Sea. We're going to blow up your ships, and we're going to make it really hard for shipping routes. And their only demand, get this, their only demand was that you cannot siege Gaza. And then there was the ceasefire that was negotiated with Trump's, envoy was responsible for getting that deal signed. And I was very grateful for it. The Israelis immediately renege on it, and they take the aid and food and water and a whole bunch of other stuff away from the Gazans once again. So the Houthis then start firing on our ships again. This is all a direct response to Israel's actions. This isn't about the U.S. The Houthis are pissed at Israel. The Houthis are trying to defend the Gazans, who are some of their allies. I mean, it's just so irritating that the narrative that, and your point earlier about how if you were going to start a war with Iran, you couldn't do it with Kamala Harris. You couldn't do it with Joe Biden, but you could do it with Donald Trump. It's so important that people understand that, because I think that's exactly what's happening, is that they would never buy the argument that our ships are being attacked, and we have to take out these Houthis to defend shipping lanes if it was Kamala Harris saying it. But Donald Trump says it, and they just go, yeah, history started today. That's all I need to hear.
Before I add more, I want to ask you a question, because you were mentioning that Saudis are fighting in Yemen or against them. I don't know if they're directly doing it or funding it. You named America, one of the richest, most powerful countries in the world with the biggest military. Saudi Arabia, who is easily one of the richest countries with the wealthiest people in the Middle East. And then Israel, which, if it's not Saudi Arabia or UAE, I would guess Israel's up there with powerful, a lot of capabilities. So do you think that the U.S., Saudi, and Israel are just thinking these people can't do anything? The Houthis obviously stand no chance against those three countries. And then even with Iran, I mean, it only gets interesting. I don't know if I'd say interesting, but it only gets debatable if Russia or China kind of got involved. But do you think that's what our allies are thinking? These people stand no chance. We'll do whatever we need to do to the Houthis. And if Iran steps up, they can't compete with America, Israel, and Saudi Arabia.
Well, I mean, it's obviously true. But then add to it that Yemen, the Yemenis, are the poorest people in the Middle East. They are the absolute poorest. Hundreds of thousands of their kids starved to death over the past decade as a consequence of this siege. So, right. I mean, they have been treated with I wouldn't say it's as bad, but it's pretty fucking close. What's happened to the Yemenis is what's happened to the Gazans. And yes, I know October 7th happened. I'm not diminishing any of that, okay? I'm just saying these people have suffered terribly, and they are the poorest in the Middle East. So yes, your point is well taken. Yeah, the alliance is overwhelmingly powerful comparatively. Like
Trump said to Zelensky, you don't have the cards right now. He left his Charizard at home, so he didn't have the cards to beat Trump in the Pokemon battle. But do you think that's how Trump and everybody feels about Yemen, where, can they attack ships? Sure. But, is that Trump's logical response where he's like, you could do that, but he's like, I could also do bigger things. So, do you think that they will chill out because he said that, because they're so outmatched? Or do you think that it'll turn into my question is, what's your concern in the sense of, is your concern, obviously you're concerned with the lives there and people who've been done wrong, But also, do you think it could end up like an Afghanistan situation where we just spend 20 years and run in circles? Or do you think it's just going to drag a bigger war that has massive consequences?
That's the concern for me. Yeah, I mean, sure, my secondary concern is the lives that are being lost. I mean, and that for many people, that would be their first concern. My first concern is still America and Americans. So like, that's my primary concern here, is that if you end up in a war with Yemen and Iran gets involved, let me just do this because it's really important that people understand, you know, I'm not being hyperbolic here. Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen who are hated by the Yemeni people, that's not true, all emanate from and are created by Iran. Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that that force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they haven't lost control. They're dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Donald J. Trump. President.
So do you not, I mean, obviously I know you to know that you don't like that statement, but is your issue with this statement not just that he's playing hardball, but that he's blaming a whole nother country? Like, you know, as if like, because even America, we have all these allies, but I don't think we have any say over what Israel does. I think it's really reverse, you know, to a large extent. But even our greatest allies and Canada or whoever, no, but we don't have total control over what they do. Like even now, all our allies seem to be disagreeing with us on almost everything. So is that your issue, that he's basically saying like control them, even though they're allies, but I'm sure that they don't have total say so.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, think about Ukraine, for instance. Like Ukraine has been funded to the tune of a couple $100 billion from the U.S. and a couple $100 billion more from the EU. Like, but we still can't dictate exactly what Zelensky does or who he attacks or how he attacks. And so it's just ridiculous. And then also extrapolate that logic. I mean, if you're going to argue that because Iran is arming and funding the Houthis, which I think is true to a certain extent, that they're culpable for everything that the Houthis do. Well, then what the fuck does Russia have to say about our arming and funding of Ukraine for the past 2.5 years or 3 years? I mean, that's a direct, then basically Putin could say, hey, just hold up that Truth Social post from Trump and say, yeah, you guys have been striking my country for the past 3 years. We're at war now. And it's hypocritical. And I know because we're the most powerful, we're allowed to be hypocrites, but it's just fucking ridiculous.
I'm not as educated on the Yemen stuff. That's why I wanted to ask you questions, kind of get into it. I know their alignments, etc., but I'm not too deep into what's been going on there. With that being said, I guess my concern is this, although obviously human lives are always a concern and people being hypocrites, but you know, what we've been told by the left mostly, but also neocons, is in Ukraine that this is for our best interest. I think Zelensky and his backers are the new Bolsheviks, and I think that they're trying to do what they did to Russia before. Like, I think it's ridiculous. I think it's against our interests. I think it's against Russia's interests. I think it's against Europe's interests. I think it's only hurt literally, I mean, it hurt Germany because of certain things that happened because of the war. Like, I don't really think it's benefited anybody. I don't think it's benefited Ukrainians. You know, I can't think of a single person that it has benefited except for people that wants to get Europeans killed and destroyed. Like, that's the only thing I could really even think of. That's what I think. When it comes to what we've done in the Middle East, like, you know, we were told, and this is, I tried to push this point because a lot of people are missing this angle because they're seeing like Trump or not Trump. This is not an attack on Trump. This is just the reality of American foreign politics. You know, they told us that Al-Qaeda did 9/11 and everybody hated Al-Qaeda in America. Understandable, rightfully so. Like, we got to go after Al-Qaeda because they attacked us on our own soil. 10 years later, a former Al-Qaeda member runs Syria because the United States and our allies have been funding rebel groups and terrorist groups in Syria. So, like, I'm trying to get along with normies and Republicans, but it's hard because you know, I'm not trying to act like I'm so great or anything, but it's like they're missing so many points of the story. It's like, you should hate Al-Qaeda because of what happened and, you know, everything. Yet you're ignoring the fact that our taxpayer dollars funded terrorists to let an Al-Qaeda member literally take over Syria and nobody's talking about it. Yep. Is that good for our foreign policy to let an Al-Qaeda member take over a country when we were told they attacked us on 9/11? yet nobody cares. And all these Republicans talking about Mahmoud Khalil, you know, there's a whole nother conversation about that, because it is kind of a legal precedent and an interesting cultural conversation to have. But the real thing is, like, let's just say he's everything that Republicans think he is. He's the worst person in the world. He's doing all these things. Is he worse than the Al-Qaeda member who's running Syria with the help of our, like, so it's like, I just, you know, and they're going after, like, I just saw a Jewish student got expelled from Columbia. He was Jewish because he had led a protest, and perhaps he broke a rule or like went into a classroom. I didn't fully look into it, but it's like, let's just say he's the worst left-wing protester of all time. Is this Jewish American who's not pro-Israel worse than the Al-Qaeda member that's running Syria? Like, so it's like, you know, they say the Trump administration is going after all these terrorists. Yet in reality, in my opinion, he's just using the word terrorist like George Bush and just basically trying to quash any criticism of his war. So, for example, let's just say he's completely wrong about the war. Let's just say you're completely right. I'm not saying you are, but that's hypothetical, right? Trump's administration would probably consider, and I'm not trying to like throw this label on you, but they'd probably consider you some sort of like they're using these words so loosely. They're calling Daryl Cooper, he's not that word, but he's that word apologist. And they're trying to get all these labels to stick so they could censor, shut people up, and get people in trouble. So it's like, even if all these things were true, I can't stand the fact that Trump is now using every agency in the government to essentially police hate speech against the country that, you know, we're absolutely at war with. And it's like, I can't say that, or I'm saying we're in a war with them as our ally, but it's like, I can't even say that country controls my country. That's considered hate speech under Trump's little anti-Semitism rules. And it's like, you know, we're fighting all these wars, and now they're trying to kneecap American citizens who speak out against them by overusing the word terrorist and saying that everyone is that. I knew Trump was going to do certain things, but once again, I think he even exceeded or under whatever, over or under, whichever way you're going, like my expectations, he has done even worse. Like I gave him a lot of leeway, and I didn't expect, you know, RFK Jr. to be looking for anti-Semitism and Fruity Pebbles, but you know, here we are. That's sarcasm, but you know, it's like, no, apparently really that's what, dude. And real quick, sorry, I saw two articles. One that said that they stopped, I think it was Haaretz that reported to Israeli publication that there were reports that the United States stopped doing human trafficking and stuff with ICE in order to look into anti-Semitism. And then I saw another article that said that the United States had some like legal battles with people, people with disabilities that have been discriminated against, and they paused those in order to, you know, basically monitor the internet or for anti-Semitism. So it's like, it's, you know, it's,
yeah, it shows where the priorities are at, right?
Right.
I mean,